Hi, I'm Nick, and this is Mexico in Hearts of Iron 4. I've been playing Mexico for, I think, about 2 weeks now, in the pursuit of the achievement, which you may also be pursuing since you're coming to this guide, of Montezuma's Revenge, I believe it's called, where you essentially occupy the states of the United States of America that Mexico used to have dominion over before ceding to the United States and Texas, in various things that occurred in the 19th century. And the other achievement is the Sunset Invasion, which involves occupying a coastal province in Europe, while being in a faction that only has South American states in it. I don't know whether they classify kind of Central American countries as South America as well. But let's just assume that everything south of Mexico is fair game for that kind of faction. But yeah, so essentially you can't be part of the Axis and or the Allies or the Comintern and invade. You have to be going it alone to an extent. So these tips also probably could be applied to a lot of other minor nations. Mexico starts in a position of very low technology. It is a larger minor nation. It has a large population. I forget exactly how much. Oh, actually, I could just check up here. So 16.5 million people. So that's rather large. Obviously not as large as the majors, but a lot larger than most of the minors. And in a way, population is a bigger limiting factor than industrial capacity is, because you can conquer factories, you can conquer countries, take their factories, take their military production, but you can't really conquer people and take their manpower. The manpower that you get for non-core states is very low, and so your starting population is very much a limiting factor to how big you can eventually get and how big a major you can take on. You can defeat the United States, and obviously that involves defeating most of the allies, but you can't necessarily go completely head to head. You're not exactly being sneaky, but and also, given the current state of the game, your divisions will probably be a lot stronger than any of the AI divisions, because the AI does not know how to build a proper army. But you are going to have issues with manpower. Essentially, the time I got the achievement for kind of conquering those bits of the United States, I was pretty much running out of manpower. Not at that point, but as I pushed further east across the United States, I was gradually losing manpower. I'd taken, I believe, several 100,000 casualties. United States have taken more casualties, but the United States has a starting population that is a lot bigger than Mexico's. The most direct analog to Mexico is Brazil, who has an even larger population and an even larger starting industrial capacity, and they both start as neutral. Peru and Venezuela start as fascist states, and Argentina starts as neutral as well. So, but Argentina also starts a lot more stronger militarily, and you've got this weird situation that Brazil has more industry than Argentina, but Argentina has a lot stronger army. So yes, these could be applied to other minor nations, but there's one particular mechanic that makes Mexico and other Latin American or well, American nations similar is that there is this Monroe Doctrine. So essentially, America starts with a guarantee on every country in the Americas, but that can be a bit misleading. They're not guaranteeing those countries against all aggression. They're guaranteeing them against essentially aggression from the old world powers. So if Britain was to declare war on Mexico or Brazil or Colombia or whoever, then America would intercede on that war. If France was to do it, if Spain was to do it. But American nations can declare war on other American nations because the Monroe Doctrine is essentially to defend the Americas as a whole from old world imperialism. However, at some point in the game, the America will reaffirm the Monroe Doctrine. Well, actually, it will go through a series of essentially democratizing different nations in the different areas in the Americas, and you'll notice that when it happens to your area. So this one does Canada and Mexico. You've got South America, you've got Central America, you've got the Caribbean. So you notice when yours gets the policy that applies to you comes into effect, and then that will be a warning that Pax Americana is going to happen soon. And Pax Americana basically means the United States can intervene in all wars between American countries, and then you will have to fight America if you aren't already fighting America. So that's the, I guess, particular mechanic to all countries in the Americas. So this guide may help with those countries in particular. So, as Mexico, if you want to do anything really, you're going to have to take on an ideology because you start as non-aligned, as does Brazil and Argentina. So these tips can help with that as well. So you're going to have to choose an ideology. If you just want to be part of the Allies, obviously you can just become democratic. But then that's not really the aggressive gameplay that you're probably going for. You can go communist. I've not really got much experience of going communist, but yeah, I would suggest fascist. I would suggest fascist for a few reasons. One, it's basically the most aggressive ideology anyway. It's going to be easy to be more aggressive with it. But also it includes manpower. Yes, and as we've discussed, manpower is very important for not only Mexico but many other nations. So this, it doesn't increase your population, but it increases your recruitable amount of your population, and 5% is pretty big. When you look at the different, conscription laws, 1.5%, 2.5%, 5%, 10%, and then 20 and 25%. So essentially, you can go through a lot of the game without even changing your conscription law, because that gives you a much bigger jump up, that militarism, national focus than the starting ones are going to. And in order to kind of go past that, so like that 5% is going to be doubling your manpower essentially, if you're in extensive conscription, and go past extensive conscription, you firstly you have to be against stronger people than you have, but also that comes with heavy penalties, factory output, construction speed, training time. Similarly with these other ones, scraping the barrel, you have to be essentially against an enemy that has twice your strength. So at that point, you're pretty much fighting for your life. You're not having an easy conquest. So that 5% is really, really good for invading people. So, yes. And the other thing is, I think fascism is slightly faster. The key percentages of support are 30% and 40% for fascism. So, after 30% fascism strength, fascism popularity in your country, you can have a coup. And once you're past 40% popularity, the probability of that coup occurring every day doubles. Technically, the mean time to happen halves, but yes, that doubles the chances. So if you haven't already had the coup, then it really kind of pushes that eventuality that you get your fascist coup, fascist takeover. Now, there are a few different ways of going towards that goal of becoming fascist, and this actually applies to any country that's trying to do it. So, you've got your fascist demagogue, obviously, gives daily fascism support 0.1. After you've gone past 20% popularity of fascism, that's going to be halved, so it will be 0.05 per day. And then once you go past 30%, it will be a third of normal. And then it kind of scales from there on, so that the higher the popularity, the slower the gain you're getting. Here in nationalism focus, you get another 0.1 daily fascism support. That also gets scaled in the same way that your demagogue would have when you get to these popularity things. But essentially, that 0.1, that additional 0.1, has halved the amount of time that it's going to take to get to the next step. So, if you really want to rush out fascism, you can just start by going straight through political effort, collectivist ethos, and nationalism focus. And then I've made a spreadsheet and worked out what dates things would occur, but I'm not going to show that to you right now because that might be a bit too boring, so just take me at my word. If you do that and take your fascist demagogue at day 70 when you've got your political effort unlocked, so 70 days to get that 120 political power that then allows you to get a fascist demagogue for 150, rather than waiting 150 days in order to take that demagogue. If you do that and then continue down to nationalism focus, you will have enough popularity in your country to have a fascist coup in early December, I think, is the outcome of that. Early December of 1936. So in less than a year, you could have a coup. But then the question is, in less than a year, are you ready to start invading people? With Mexico, you start with an army that is more than capable of actually defeating every person, certainly every Central American nation. You can defeat Ecuador with that starting army, and you can, I think I've done it. I've defeated Colombia with my starting army, but it's a little more tenuous. And by that point, you can actually have Peru or Venezuela as your allies because they start as fascists. Can create a faction with them and bring them into that war, and that makes that Colombia war a lot, war a lot easier. So you certainly can rush to that, but alternatively, you could do the normal minor strategy that most people seem to be doing of getting construction effort and getting all these civilian factories to ramp up your production, and then going on a murderous rampage. One thing I need to say about this is that I actually think that you are going to expand the number of factories you have faster through military conquest than you are going to through building. And certainly once you've conquered a lot of these nations, most of them, you'll get one civilian factory and one military factory, or in some of the later ones, one civilian factory, one military factory, one dockyard, which is helpful since you start with no dockyards. Um, the yeah, once you've got to that point, you've got all these extra factories, so you can start building even faster. The civilian factory building at the start is going to be rather slow going. I think you get your first one in October, just on March the next year, but that actually speeds up due to technology and getting more factories. So it is a bit slow going to build those initial factories. So you could just go invading, or you could wait a bit. And I don't really think you're losing that much by waiting a bit. So certainly you can go down this path and then go, well, I guess be passively through your demagogue, getting your fascism up and running, and then and meanwhile be doing your construction efforts. And then once you're actually invading people and you want to get your faction, you then go down political tree having already done all your things. And that certainly has some advantage because you are so backwards in technology that having an extra research slot as soon as possible could certainly be very useful. So, apart from that demagogue, though, what can you use your political power for? I would only really, well, depending on which path you go, if you try to rush out fascism as soon as possible, you're only really going to have time to get one or two more things. I would suggest only one. And the crucial other thing with political power and your coup is that you want to have more than 150 political power when your coup happens so that you can immediately switch to a war economy. Well, actually, to partial mobilization. But if there's more than 15% war tension, then you can switch straight to war economy. And that is actually the best reason for not rushing to fascism, because you aren't going to be getting that war economy until enough things happen in the world. So essentially, the Spanish Civil War needs to resolve, or Japan needs to invade China. If either of those two things have happened, then you can go to war economy. If they haven't happened yet, which is what's going to occur if you just rush straight to fascism, then you're going to have to go partial mobilization and then later spend more political power to go to war economy. Yeah, so if you're taking it a bit more slowly, then you can get 2 or 3 political advisors with your political power before you need to start saving up for not only the switch to a different economy, but also to spend on fabricating claims on, or justifying war goals actually, on these countries. So that these will cost about 44 is the first one, and then as world tension increases, then they become cheaper. Yes. So yeah, I would suggest probably industrial company and a military theorist. Mexico doesn't really have many good options. There's no designers that give any bonuses. You've got the normal aircraft designers that give bonuses. You've got the normal tank designer that gives increased reliability to armor, but all the other ones, there's no special companies that give some special bonus. Unlike, for instance, when I was playing Sweden, where you have Bofors, which makes your artillery better. So there's not really a huge amount of choice in there, and you don't really need those or want those until you start really increasing your military technology anyway. which you don't need to do for your initial wars. Your initial wars you can do with your starting army. So on that note, what are we going to do with research? I would always suggest to go construction 1 first, because essentially the strategy is to, well, the best strategy is to do construction first, because then that allows you to build your factories faster, and then concentrate on getting equipment, because there's no point increasing your factory output until those factories actually have things to build, which at the start of the game for Mexico, they have 1934 artillery, which is what they're going to be using for quite some time, until 1939, but they don't have 1936 weapons, they don't have any of the other things they're going to be building. So basically, you don't want to start getting your output until you've already unlocked all the things you need that output for. So yes, I would say construction is your primary priority. I would go construction 1, and then when you get your industrial effort, hold that research bonus. Don't do any more industrial research until the start of 1937, or as I normally do with research, just due to the way that the days end up happening, on November 25, usually one of my researchers, I forget which one, ends, or at least one of my research slots opens up, and then I wait, I reserve the days until December 25, and then I click on December 25 on the construction 2, and thus I get construction 2 as soon as possible and continue building factories. With my other slot, generally I've been going computing. Computing seems like it's a trap. It certainly is a trap in terms of research time, because there's so many. It's a 250 days base cost thing for a bonus that takes a long time to pay itself back. So I'm tempted to avoid it altogether. However, computing is required for encryption and decryption. And encryption and decryption, in my opinion, is very important, because I like to actually know how many units the enemy has, and ideally I'd like the enemy not to know how many units I have. So because you're going to be doing encryption and decryption, you may as well do computing, and if you're going to do computing at all, you want to do it as soon as possible, so that the research bonus has the most time to pay itself off. On the other hand, delaying, for instance, the penalty to delaying is essentially just going to be 2% of the amount of days you delayed that. So maybe you would prefer to have your infantry guns as soon as possible, and then go to your electronic mechanical engineering, or maybe not, whatever you feel like. After that, in terms of construction and computing, my next priority is equipment. So yes, unlocking guns and support equipment, and not artillery yet, but motorized, and all those things, all the typical things that you need for your army. Eventually I will build mostly infantry and some mountain infantry, because there are lots of mountains in the up here in the United States, so mountain infantry is really good there. Also, there's lots of mountains in South America, so mountain infantry will be very useful. And then, of course, armor divisions. I go for light self-propelled artillery 2 mixed with motorized, just because that's the most soft attack thing you can really do on wheels. and or at least that point in time, and that works well. And the AI doesn't build enough armor to really need to worry about heavy attack. You just want soft attack currently. Um, Now, two particular things I need to point out is that you want to have transports before you get to... How do I move my... Oh, yeah, there. Before you get to Panama or Ecuador or Colombia, you're going to need to do an amphibious assault of those countries. I would actually suggest amphibiously assaulting Ecuador before you take Colombia, because it's a lot easier to attack Colombia from the south, up the mountain range rather than against the mountain range. And also they don't defend their south as well as they can defend their north. So yeah, you're going to want that amphibious, but you're also going to want to get submarines as soon as possible, because submarines, when you do end up fighting America, are going to be the only thing stopping America and the Allies amphibiously assaulting you. America has a massive navy. They can easily beat you in any fleet battle, but your submarines are stealthy and avoid America most of the time, and you'll probably find that you can build submarines as fast as they can sink them. Meanwhile, those submarines will stop amphibious assaults and shoot down their torpedo their convoys, and cause a general nuisance, and that is what you need them to do. So I almost would suggest that submarines are a higher priority than your infantry things. Of course, the question with submarines, given that we have national focuses of submarines, do we use this submarine effort to slingshot from 1940 submarines to 1944 era submarines, or do we use them to slingshot from 1936 submarines to 1940 submarines? Because it's going to really reduce the ahead of time penalty to 0. And currently there's actually a bug with it I've found, so that you get the 50% the 50% research time bonus, as well as the reduced ahead of time penalty. So you end up slingshotting, like really quickly slingshotting. I've been slingshotting to 1944 just because it isn't really until 1940 that you have to fight America anyway. Well, 1941 maybe you have to fight America, but isn't until 1940 till I decide to attack America, because they've never attacked me, I've always attacked them. So yeah, submarines, important. Amphibious, important. Equipment after you've done construction. Factories after you've done equipment. After you unlock the equipment you need those factories to do. And then bonuses after all of that, because you need to... So these things here, they're just passive bonuses. You get those after you've built all your equipment, just before you actually want to use that equipment in a war. So that's the research strategy. What about factories? So as I say, you start with the artillery that you need. I would probably cancel this and just build towed artillery for now. And yeah, and then later on, obviously when you've unlocked the proper infantry equipment, do that. I generally do not start trading to get the steel to decrease the cost until I actually have more factories, because well, basically, and this is another reason why I don't get the equipment immediately. There's no point unlocking that equipment until I have a lot of factories to build that equipment. So I almost don't really get the equipment up and running until I've started invading people. That's just well, obviously I'd do it before then, because by that point I've got all those unlocked. But I still don't really trade until I can get more factories, so that the trading is more efficient, and also that gives me more time with all my civilian factories to build things with. Now, expansion strategy, the final point of this. So as I say, Mexico is strong enough with their starting army to take everyone up to the border with Brazil. After that, that should be, so 1938, I think you can get there by. Around then, 1938, 1939, you should have taken all of that, and probably sooner than that if you really rushed. Then you might want to take Brazil. My tips for Brazil are, I've learnt the hard way, do not attack through the Amazon. That's a bad strategy. What you want to do is you want to amphibiously assault here in Maranhão, or however you pronounce it, Maranhão. Amphibiously assault there, and then from there amphibiously assault here. Actually, you can amphibiously assault Rio Grande immediately, so amphibiously assault both of those spots, and then from Rio Grande amphibiously assault their capital, Rio de Janeiro. Did Brasilia not exist at this point? I don't know. Anyway, you amphibiously assault Rio de Janeiro, and and essentially just have some army groups all pushing in. By that point, you should obviously have more infantry to do things with, but also if you formed a faction with Peru and Venezuela, you actually find that due to supply concerns, they just give you all of their armies as volunteers, or expeditionary forces. I forget which one it's called. Yeah, expeditionary forces, and so you then just use their units to invade people. You can go Chile as well. Chile has the most iron in South America, and iron is actually, steel, and the America is actually really low in steel. You have a lot of oil, you have a lot of chromium in the Central America, but you don't have steel until you start invading Arizona and Nevada. Yeah, so that's the best reason to attack the United States, because they have all the resources and so many factories that you really become a lot stronger when you invade the United States. But yeah, the question is, do you have the manpower, and is it worth the amount of lives lost to invade the United States? Is that going to cripple you and stop you doing other things? But that's up to you to learn and decide. One final thing that I forgot to mention is that in terms of national focuses that other people take, what the other countries take, I've noticed that Ecuador always takes often takes all the industrial and construction effort national focuses, and a lot of the other countries don't. So this leads to Ecuador actually having a lot more factories, and so that's why I really like invading Ecuador. Ecuador has, by the time that you invade them, they usually have about 17 unlocked slots, and they have about 11 or 12 factories in those slots. When you invade someone, you're only going to get half of their slots available, but you don't get half of their factories. You get half those slots, and then that many slots plus or minus one or two factories worth. So Ecuador is a jewel in the south, though obviously not as many factories as you can get from Colombia or Brazil, but they're a lot bigger. But anyway, once you've done those things, you're pretty much set. So enjoy. Enjoy your invasions of the world. And I'll see you on the internet another time.